Our next guest covers college football, talks about college football, writes about college football with Athlon Sports. Mitch Light, kind enough to join us here on the doorstep of fall camp. How are you, Mitch?
I'm doing great, Bill. Hope you are doing well, and everyone out there is enjoying all this publicity about the Utes.
It's potentially a really big year. You and I have talked about that, though, throughout this offseason. We thought 18 could be a good year, but most of us around here kind of had 19 circled, assuming everybody came back, and everybody came back, and it's potentially, at least on paper right now, it's not really a secret out west anymore. A lot of national publications have picked them as a playoff sleeper, as a favorite in the Pac-12. So there's now some real expectations, not just in-house expectations, but real expectations with Utah football.
Yeah, and well-deserved. And you mentioned playoff sleeper. I do a lot of these once our magazines come out, especially in the late spring, early summer. Do a lot of these, talking college football around the nation. And everyone always says, give me a sleeper, a team that, people aren't talking about. And my answer up to this point has been Utah, that's kind of hanging out right outside the top 10, a team that, if things go right, could elbow its way into that playoff discussion. But now I don't think it's any more of a sleeper, a pick anymore. And we've talked about, Utah deserves all of the credit. They are a very good team, but they've also picked not that they control it this way, but they picked a good year to be really good because of the rest of the it's hard to make a sound argument for any other team in the Pac-12 South. You could argue that Washington and or Oregon should be the pick to win the league. I wouldn't make that pick right now, but you got to be a real USC homer or someone to pick anyone other than Utah to win the South.
Yeah, it's a weird time in the South. You've still got transition from some coaching changes a year ago, culture issues at SC, and obviously, Colorado made a coaching change. I think Utah is probably 2 games better than most teams in the South if they stay healthy. The overall they edged out Oregon, they edged out Washington, but I've said this all the way along. I mean, right now, if you're making predictions for the season and you're just going on what you know, Utah's got the fewest questions, and that's why I picked them to win the Pac-12 conference. That's not to say Washington couldn't do it. That's not to say Oregon couldn't do it. Because they absolutely could, because they're talented teams. But those teams have more questions in key areas, I think, Mitch, than Utah does.
Yeah, and I want to go back to your first point about, being 2 games better. I was just, right before I came on the air, I was just kind of curious. And I went over our national rankings because we rank all 130 teams. And, we got Utah 13th, and then UCLA 42, USC 43, Arizona State 45, Arizona 46. So that tells me 2 things. One is there's quite a big gap there, and 2 is we couldn't figure out how to rank the rest of the division, so we just threw them all into the 40s there. So, and it gives Utah some wiggle room. So I would agree. A lot of times, and I say this a lot when people ask me about Alabama and Clemson and Georgia, how do we make our picks? It's like when teams are that good, you don't always talk about what they do well. You try and poke holes in their resume. What could be some of the issues that they have? Because if you're ranked in the top 5, you're good at almost everything. So along those lines, Bill, I would agree. Utah, it's harder to poke holes in Utah than some of the other teams. Washington, supremely talented, but, obviously the losses on defense were huge. A new quarterback stepping in. I would agree with your line of thinking there.
It's what I tell people. Washington might end up being really good this year, but when you lose 15 starters and 9 on defense, I don't care how good you've recruited. There's a learning curve to getting guys experience. It wasn't as if Ben Burke-Curvin or Taylor Rapp were taking a lot, or Greg Gaines were taking a lot of reps and series off last year for Washington. Those guys played a lot of time. Jimmy Lake's a fantastic defensive coordinator. Chris Peterson's he's a lot like Kyle Whittingham. Not only is he a terrific coach, but he builds great culture in his program, and they've recruited well. But they may lose a game or 2 early. By the time Utah sees them in November, they may be a well-oiled machine, but it's the totality of the season. Same thing with Oregon. I know that Mario Cristobal has recruited very well lately, and he had a great recruiting class last year, but you and I follow enough college football to know there's very few true freshmen that come in and impact a team right away. It usually takes you a year to do so. Justin Herbert was great, but he was great a year ago, too. They lost his best weapon, so let's see what happens with Oregon. And again, they've got a tough schedule. They've got to come right out of the gates with Auburn.
Yeah, one thing about Washington that's interesting to me, defensively, this is a stat that I just loved from last year. They allowed only 1 play of 40-plus yards. The next fewest in the country was 4 by BYU. And if you talk to any defensive coordinator or any offensive defensive coordinators, I think us in media and fans sometimes don't pay enough attention to big plays. It's very hard to march the length of the field,
Yep.
Keep stringing together first downs without, not getting a first down or turning the ball over. So I don't know if that's something that Washington can replicate, like with all those new players. So defensively, they're liable to give up some big plays and some game-changing plays there. So that's something that scares me about Washington. In Oregon, I'm with you. They got a lot of talent there. They blew that Stanford game last year. They could have even been one game better, but I'm not 100% sold on Cristobal yet. So, we went Washington in the North. I was kind of surprised that Oregon was the pick by the media.
I was a little bit, too. We're talking to Mitch Light from Athlon Sports. You know the SEC. You're located right down there in Nashville, and you're around Vanderbilt football quite a bit. I'm curious, what's Oregon going to see out of Auburn? I never know quite what to make of a Gus Malzahn team early in the year. I know they'll have talent. To me, they're a lot like LSU. There's going to be talent in the program, but I'm just never quite sure what to do. And they're replacing their quarterback. Jared Stidham's now moved on to the National Football League, but they're always seemingly good up front, kind of like Utah on defense. They have athletes all over the place. They usually have about 4 running backs. But what's Oregon going to see at Jerry World?
Yeah, well, Auburn has been one of the more schizophrenic programs in college football, not just the SEC in recent years, and one of the more difficult ones to get a preseason read on, because when we think they're going to be good, they implode, and if you pick them 4th or 5th, they go 8-0, and they play for a national title. But this is obviously a huge year for Gus Malzahn. If you follow college football, you know about the soap opera that goes on down there. He's reclaimed the play calling duties, which I think is a good thing. He's one of the best play callers, one of the best offensive minds in the game. But he's got to get the quarterback situation right. He's got Joey Gatewood, who's a really talented redshirt freshman, but there's a true freshman named Bo Nix, who's the son of former Auburn quarterback Patrick Nix, who's kind of the fan favorite down there. So, when Gus Malzahn has a good quarterback to run his offense, they're explosive. Now, you mentioned they always have, 3 or 4 running backs, and they do, but they have precious little, proven talent back. That well has kind of dried up, so they need to identify some running backs there. But their defense has been very good in recent years. They're on the defensive line. They're as good as almost any team in the country there. So that's going to be a fascinating Week 1 game. That the winner of that game really kind of the fan base sticks its chest out and is ready for the rest of the season. The loser of that game is it's going to be tough to recover from for either team.
We're talking to Mitch Light from Athlon Sports. You can lend a little insight to the most recent iteration of Andy Ludwig's offense because you're part of the Vanderbilt broadcast team. They had a big year last year, and he had a 3,000-yard passer. He had a 1,000-yard rusher. He had, I think, a couple of 1,000-yard receivers or tight ends. Give me a position group that you think could really thrive under Andy Ludwig here at Utah.
Tight end. He did. Jared Pinkney was a really good tight end. He did a good job utilizing, and Pinkney he came back to school for his 5th year and could be a first-round draft pick. So he's a really talented guy. So, a lot of coaches, will get the ball to him. But, Andy Ludwig did a really good job employing the tight ends in different formations because, he's a marked man. Everyone knew that the tight end Pinkney was a good player, but they moved him around a lot, got him open downfield, intermediate routes, some deep routes. He averaged over 15 yards per reception, which is really good for a tight end. So I think that there's no doubt that the tight ends will benefit there. And they had a lot of big plays last year, a lot of big plays in the run game and the pass game. And I know that was something that Utah did not, one thing they didn't do great offensively, a lot of big plays. So I would suspect that offensive staff is trying to figure out ways to get the ball down the field quickly.
We're talking to Mitch Light here at ESPN 700 from Athlon Sports. I'm very curious to see, too, one of the issues, Tyler Huntley's not been able to stay 100% healthy. He hurt his shoulder in his sophomore year when he started against Arizona. Last year he was having a Grammy. He was probably as effective as any quarterback not named Tua or Trevor Lawrence in the month of October last year, and then went down with the collarbone injury against ASU. He was exposed a lot, Mitch, out on the edges and design calls in Troy Taylor's offense. I'm curious, does Andy Love, and Andy made mention of this, Kyle Whittingham talked about it at Pac-12 Media Day. He's never had a quarterback with the athletic skill set of Tyler Huntley. I'd be curious, does Andy expose his quarterbacks much, or is he going to keep them in, protect them, maybe an occasional designed run? But what's he do with his quarterbacks in the open spaces?
Not a good comparison because Kyle Shermer, Vanderbilt's 3.5-year starting quarterback, who's now trying to win a job with the Kansas City Chiefs, a roster spot, was a very good quarterback. He's the school's all-time leader in yards and touchdowns, but maybe the least mobile starter in Division I last year, FBS last year. So they did, Andy Ludwig and SF, they did everything they could to protect him and to keep him in the pocket. Now, talking to Andy, because I would talk to him, every week for the coordinator interviews and some stuff on the record, off the record. Now, they loved Kyle Shermer as a staff, but I could tell it frustrated him some that he could not utilize the quarterback in the run game at all. They had a backup quarterback who's back this year named Deuce Wallace that, in no way did I think they wanted to replace Shermer, but I just knew that they were excited that had Andy returned this year, that he was going to have a quarterback who could move around some more. And then they're welcoming a grad transfer, Riley Neal, who has a similar skill set. So I guess the point being, they will utilize Huntley's strength to run the ball. I know it's not like Andy, they're just going to drop back and throw it all over the place, but with his injury history, they have to be aware of that and try and keep him healthy.
All right, right now, we talked about Utah as a sleeper. I think Utah's going to have to be one loss. I think really anybody in the Pac-12, if they want to be a playoff team, have to be undefeated or one loss. I don't think a two-loss Pac-12 team is going to make the college football playoff. Again, that depends on what happens in the SEC, the ACC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, things like that. But would you agree, if the Pac-12 is going to get a playoff representative this year, they've either got to be undefeated or one loss, and not a bad loss?
Yeah, because there's not enough elite teams out there to suffer, those losses. Like if you're Utah and you lose to Washington, okay, on one hand, you've lost your opportunity for that great quality win, and then if you have a loss or two in the South, it's probably not going to be against the top 15 teams.
Correct.
Obviously things could happen. USC could put it all together finally and be a top 10 team. But if things kind of shake out how we think is how good teams are, I totally agree with you that a Pac-12 team could not afford a second loss and still be in the hunt there.
Who are the four you like right now? I'm going to guess Bama and Clemson are there, or maybe you're going to be an outlier and say maybe Georgia gets past Bama this year. But who are your four today as we sit here, a month out from the season?
Yeah, I'm staying true to the magazine, which we published, in late May. Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, top three, and then Michigan as the fourth. The top three were easy. Took us about 25 seconds of discussion to pick those three. Then we spent a lot of time on Michigan, Ohio State, Oklahoma, some of those other teams. But I think this is the year that Michigan puts it all together. Yeah,
I kind of look at it with Michigan and say, okay, if you're not going to get it done now, with an experienced quarterback and a ton of talent coming back against a first-year head coach. Now, Ryan Day's he's no rookie, but he is a rookie in some ways, and albeit against a talented but now a first-year starting quarterback in Fields, it kind of begs the question, if you're not going to get it done this year at Michigan, when are you going to get it done?
Yeah, and I'm all on board the Michigan train, but there's one thing that concerns me. Josh Gaddis, new offensive coordinator, never called plays before. It's really transforming this offense. They were the slowest offense in the Big Ten last year as far as snaps per minute and all that. They want to run up-tempo. Shea Patterson, the quarterback, ran it at Ole Miss and ran it effectively. But again, with championship aspirations this year, Harbaugh is turning his keys over to a first-time play caller. Josh Gaddis, very well-respected in the industry. He's coached under, James Franklin. Nick Saban, he's come up the right way. But again, first-time coordinator scares me a little bit there.